Let me start with something simple but powerful. Don't compare your chapter one to somebody else's chapter 10, because that's exactly what most people are doing right now. And honestly, it's never been easier to fall into that trap. You open up social media, and within seconds, you see somebody closing on some multi-million dollar home, maybe somebody else buying investment properties, maybe one of your friends opening up a brand new business. And it all looks like it just happened overnight without ever even realizing it. You start asking yourself, what am I doing wrong? But the truth is, you're not behind. You're just early in your story. Today, on a brand new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast, I want to break this down in a very real way, from real estate to business to personal growth, so you guys can also stop comparing and start progressing. With all that being said, we're going to jump right into it. If you guys notice, I'm by myself today. My co-host Ben will be back next week, but this is just a quick and dirty, real easy to follow podcast that I think has a lot of impact because it's something that I deal with also. And I've gotten some value out of the content that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today, and hopefully you get a little bit out of it too. So first off, we just want to start with what I like to call the comparison trap. So a comparison feels natural, but it's also incredibly misleading because you're comparing your starting point to somebody else's highlight reel. Let me say that again. You're comparing your starting point to somebody else's highlight reel. This is so common these days, and it's because you're seeing the result, not the reps, the outcome, not the years it took to get there. And social media, of all places, makes this the absolute worst because nobody is posting about their chapter one, their day one. They're showing all the highlights, but they're not showing the uncertainty, the mistakes, the slow progress, and probably the biggest one of them all, the self-doubt. They're showing chapter 10, and sometimes it's even chapter 15. And when you compare that, you're not comparing evenly. You're comparing your beginning to somebody else's middle. And that's a losing game every single time. So just as an example, I'll use real estate since that's something that I'm in on a daily basis. And I see this all the time with buyers, especially first-time home buyers. They'll say things like, Adam, I feel behind, or Adam, man, I wish I could buy what other people are buying. And what they're doing is they're comparing their first home to somebody else's, third or fourth. What they don't see is, that investor also started somewhere. Their first deal probably wasn't perfect either. Probably had some work that needed to be done. It maybe really stretched them super thin, but they started, they did something, they took action. And that's what creates momentum. In real estate, along with many other parts of your life, progress always tends to compound. So your first home is going to eventually lead to your second is going to lead to your third, and that equity is going to build, that experience is going to build, and that confidence is going to build. But none of that happens if you stay stuck only in this comparison mode. Again, comparing your, chapter one to somebody else's chapter 10. And this, like I said, applies not just to real estate. This applies to everything. It's truly about business, fitness, money, personal growth. You'll always see somebody ahead of you and think that you should be further along. But what you don't see is how long they've been doing it. Years of consistency, years of learning, years of failure. Nobody skips chapters. They just stop talking about the early ones. And that is so important, I think. And I wish more people were more honest and accountable and just more authentic with their presentation of what it was like on their day one. But, who knows? Maybe we'll start to see more of that. But it just always tends to be the highlight reel, which is really, really tough. So I want to just also share with you guys something that I actually learned a couple years ago. And it's a very interesting concept. And it's called the Valley of Despair. And definitely, look this up online, check it out on Google or even in ChatGPT. Just look up the Valley of Despair. But there's this really cool understanding of how people have different levels of confidence and just abilities to progress, maybe going from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 10. And to get there, you have to go through this valley of despair. So it's a phrase that basically is, where you're putting in your effort, but you're not seeing the results yet. So you're in this valley of despair. And unfortunately, this is where most people quit. And that's because they start comparing their progress to somebody who's already on the other side of all of this. What they don't realize, though, is they're actually closer than they think. This is a very, very dangerous place to be in because so many people end up quitting at this point. Every level of success goes through this phase of, again, it's called the Valley of Despair. And that's where it really just feels like it's not working, but it is. You just haven't given it enough time yet. Valley of Despair also can totally relate to pretty much anywhere in your life. And I just think that's such a powerful thing to, over time, ingrain in your brain, because what starts to happen is when you've been in this Valley of Despair before and you've pushed on and you've gotten through it, at that point, you not sometimes even without even realizing it internally, you're building up that self-confidence and also that awareness of this is what that valley of despair feels like. So now let's just say this happens again with another venture, something else that you're working towards, and this same feeling comes over you, this feeling of despair. You're in this valley of despair again, but now you're acknowledging it. You're realizing that, hey, this isn't new. I recognize this. This is familiar to me. And this just gives you that extra bit of power, confidence, and ability to push forward even easier that second time and know that all of the great stuff is waiting on the other side of this. It's just a matter of continuing to go. Just keep going. So, with all that being said, let's just shift our focus here for a second. So what do you do instead? Instead of comparison syndrome, where you're always comparing your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 10, what do you do instead? Well, you stop comparing and you start tracking, not against other people, but against yourself. I love this phrase that I don't know, probably about 10 years ago, I learned this, and I just have always had it in the back of my mind. And it's, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And this is really important here, because the best way to do this is just to start asking yourself better questions. Am I better than I was 6 months ago? Am I actually making progress? Am I seeing progress being made here? Am I staying consistent? These types of things are what you need to be asking yourself, because progress is very personal and success is also built very quietly, just one decision, one action, one step at a time. So if you guys are in chapter 1 right now, that's actually a good thing. Congratulations, because that means you're starting. And starting is what most people never even get to. They never even get to the point of starting something. Most people stay stuck, watching, comparing, waiting instead of moving. So don't rush your timeline. Don't skip steps, and don't let somebody else's chapter 10 make you feel like your chapter 1 isn't enough, because it is. And it's exactly where you're supposed to be. If you guys took one little thing from this episode, just try and have this be the main thing you take home. You're not behind. You're just building right now. And the only thing that really truly matters is that you just keep going. You're going to have that valley of despair. And if you do, that's great. That means you're on the right path. Keep pushing forward. And over time, that's just going to become that much easier every time you get to that valley of despair to keep progressing and pushing through. And before you know it, you're going to be at chapter 10, and you'll have other people in their chapter 1 comparing themselves to you. With all that being said, you guys, appreciate you being here on another episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Any episode that you've checked out on YouTube, that helps get the message out to more people. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, we'd love just to hear from you. Maybe leave us a quick 5-star review, or if nothing else, just share it with a friend, share it with somebody else that you think would get value also out of this topic today, as well as any of our others in the past, as well as any of them that we've got coming for you in the future. We release new episodes every single Friday, and we can't wait to see you guys on the next one. With that, I'll see you guys later. This is the Pursuit of Progress podcast. We'll catch you next time.